After starting over in love, she believed she'd found her Prince Charming.
He would speak of marriage.
She thought he was the one.
But a horrifying discovery will destroy their happily ever after.
The ladies, no breed.
She had been strangled and left in the bathtub of a seedy highway motel.
It's almost like a crime novel come to life, something you see in a movie.
Was this the work of a deranged highway killer?
These motels, they're just magnets for crime.
This is obviously a serial violent offender.
Or was this a crime born of obsession and rage?
He treated her as if he had ownership of her.
That wasn't his first time hitting a girl.
Things got out of control.
It's hard to think that someone you love would be that violent.
November 2nd, 2019. It's a crisp fall Saturday in Lakewood, Colorado, a city of 150,000 that sprawls between Denver and the Rocky Mountain foothills.
Everywhere you turn around, you see beautiful mountains. You see people hiking and doing rock climbing.
It's just a really outdoor-focused community.
But that night, as the city settles in after a long day on the slopes and trails, a maintenance man knocks on the door of a motel room on West Alameda Avenue.
It's an older motel among a long stretch of highway motels.
There were numerous people in the motel going to the front and saying, "Hey, we can't get any hot water."
And so the maintenance man had come to check it out and see what the problem was. And he saw that water was leaking from under the door of room number 3.
Maintenance, hello?
When he doesn't get a response, the maintenance man uses his master key to unlock the door.
Maintenance, hello? Is there a problem?
The maintenance man sees the water coming out of the bathroom.
When he pushes the door open, he makes a horrifying discovery.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
He sees a woman dead in the bathtub.
She was found in the bathtub on her back, and the water had been left running.
The maintenance man quickly dials 911.
911?
911, what's the emergency?
9 now, number 3. The ladies, no breed, the lady died.
I'm sorry, what's happening?
Lady is the passed away.
A female possibly passed away?
Yeah.
A Lakewood police officer races to the scene, but there's no saving the woman in the bath.
It appeared she'd been dead for quite a while. It was difficult to determine initially how she passed away.
But the officer is able to make a preliminary identification.
As they were kind of inventorying the room, they noticed that there was a wallet with a driver's license inside of it.
It belongs to Ratasha Pryor Thomas.
According to her driver's license, Ratasha lived in a house in Lakewood on the other side of town. So how did she end up dead in a motel room?
32-year-old Ratasha Pryor Thomas had always been the quiet type.
She was an introvert. She somewhat kept to herself, and she loved art. She loved drawing. She was a fantastic artist.
She had a very, contagious personality, from her laugh to the way she spoke and sang.
She loved to sing. She had a beautiful voice.
She used to always play, Destiny's Child and TLC. I just remember listening to all types of music with my mom.
Ratasha loved music so much, she even let go of her introverted tendencies and took a shot at performing.
Actually, Ratasha wanted to become a singer.
She actually went to the Apollo. She and her best friend went and auditioned there, and I was surprised she did that because that's a very big thing to do for a shy person.
But those dreams took a backseat to motherhood when Ratasha gave birth to a beautiful baby girl in 2006.
By her 20s, Ratasha was a single mom working in a restaurant to provide for her daughter, Judea.
She didn't mind the hard work because being a mother was the most important thing in her life, and Judea was her shining light.
We were really close. When it comes to like girly stuff, I always did that with my mom, like going to get our nails done, or sometimes we would just hang out and eat or watch movies.
While the relationship with Jadea's father hadn't worked out, Rotasha found comfort in the arms of an old classmate named Felix King.
Felix was funny and kind, and he was great with Rotasha's daughter.
They had a great relationship. She thought that was the one.
Over time, however, Rotasha and Felix's romance hit a snag.
He couldn't hold down a job.
Their financial stability becomes a strain.
Rotasha tried to help Felix get a job, but he never seemed motivated to work.
Like, we're hiring right now. I can get you an interview with the manager.
Those long hours, baby, I can spend at home with you. You don't want me going all the time, do you?
Felix, you can't just sit around all day doing nothing. I need you to contribute, Felix.
It seemed to Rotasha that Felix didn't mind being unemployed, as long as she was paying his way. And that wasn't going to work for someone as independent as Rotasha.
Their relationship started to have some problems.
Felix tried to convince her that they could make things work, that he had real feelings for her, but Rotasha ended the relationship.
As a mother, she realized that she couldn't have that instability in her life.
Having children to look after, that really puts her in a very different place about what her future should look like.
After the breakup, Rotasha refocused her attention on her daughter.
She was very hesitant to get back into the dating scene.
And when she first met Jarvis Gates, she didn't take his pursuit seriously.
Can I get you anything else?
How about your phone number?
Jarvis, how long have you been coming in here and flirting? You know I'm not dating right now.
Come on. I would love to take you out on the time. I promise I'll be the perfect gentleman. I won't even kiss you goodnight.
Fine, but only as friends. I mean it. Enjoy your sandwich.
He was more like a rebound.
But Jarvis was determined to sweep Rotasha off her feet.
He had a steady job at a distribution warehouse and didn't hesitate to spend money on her.
He treated her like a queen.
Between the gifts and attention, Rotasha finally felt that she was getting the kind of love she deserved.
Rotasha thought she had found the man of her dreams, and the two started talking about taking the next steps.
She finally had the stability that she's always wanted.
But now Rotasha has been found dead in a motel bathtub, and police are trying to piece together what happened to her.
Off the interstate there, the old motels along Alameda Avenue aren't really on most tourist itineraries.
They have just become these sort of toxic playgrounds for like drug dealers.
Initially, police thought maybe there had been an accident or some sort of overdose.
But upon closer inspection, police realized Rotasha's death was no accident.
There were bruises around the victim's neck.
There was almost nothing left in the room except her identification and some food. Nothing Rotasha could have used to cause the bruising on her neck herself, which leads to one conclusion.
She's been strangled to death.
When you see what happened to her, it's almost like a crime novel come to life. It's almost like something you see in a movie.
In the fall of 2019, hard-working single mother Rotasha Pryor Thomas had found love with a new man, Jarvis Gates.
She was very hesitant to get back into the dating scene, but Jarvis treated her right.
When Jarvis comes into her life and he's showering her with TLC, that affection, that care, she's thinking, I guess I found my future king.
He would speak of marriage.
But Jarvis's dreams of marrying Rotasha would come to a nightmarish end on November 2nd, 2019.
Dispatch received a call that there was a woman found in a motel room bathtub, and she was unresponsive.
What's interesting about the motel is it sits about a mile and a half south of a really famous road called Colfax Avenue. And Colfax was once described as the longest and wickedest road in America. And the reason is because there are so many motels. They account for an inordinate number of police calls. Unfortunately, they're just magnets for crime.
Immediately, police had to wonder if this was the work of some highway killer that had lured Rotasha to this motel, just based on the savage nature of her death.
Rotasha's kind of banged up. She's bruised around the neck.
It's just a terrifying way to be killed.
To detectives, it's evident that Rotasha had struggled with her killer.
They noticed that she's been injured in other places.
She had scrapes on her knees and on her ankle.
She's got bruising on her head, her legs.
All of these are indications of a violent death.
The police start looking around and they notice there's almost nothing in that hotel room. There's just Rotasha's driver's license and wallet and a bucket of chicken.
There was practically nothing in the room. It looked like no one had really been staying there very long.
But it's also what's missing from the room that piques detectives' interest.
All of the bed sheets from one of the beds had been removed.
If Rotasha had been murdered in the bed, the killer likely tried to dispose of these sheets in an attempt to get rid of any blood and DNA evidence.
Examining the bed a little bit closer, they noticed some blood spatter on the headboard.
This in turn supported detectives' theory that Rotasha was likely moved from the bed to the bathtub in order to wash away any DNA evidence on her body.
Detectives knew that a random killer wasn't likely to clean up after themselves, so they started to think that Rotasha was targeted for some reason, and the person who did this likely knew her.
After Rotasha's body is removed for autopsy, detectives make their way outside to search the grounds.
The police are trying to find the bed sheets. They're clearly missing from the room.
In a dumpster behind the motel, they found bedding that appeared to have blood stains.
Detectives continue searching the dumpster and locate more evidence.
They also find a receipt for the chicken.
The police noticed the receipt said 6:30 p.m. on Halloween.
In hopes of creating a more thorough timeline, detectives canvass the other motel guests.
The police start working their way around the hotel, talking to people, asking them if they've seen anything.
Unfortunately, few of the guests were all that willing to talk. They couldn't get anyone to say they'd seen anything suspicious in the past 48 hours.
These motor lodges, these motels in an area that's no longer traveled became like no-tell motels where people would rent more by the hour than by the day.
When detectives speak to the motel manager, he provides them with a name on the motel register.
The hotel room was rented to a man by the name of William Hunt.
The manager also told police that given the nature of the motel, it was pretty common for people to register under false names.
But the manager also provides a crucial piece of evidence.
Then the motel manager tells police that they actually have a surveillance camera that is pointed at room number 3.
Appreciate it.
When detectives review the video back at the station, they discover Rotasha first entering the room on Halloween night.
Looking at this footage, they see Rotasha and a medium-built black man both go into that room around 8:15.
They weren't carrying any luggage, but the man was carrying the takeout container full of chicken.
While detectives can confirm the woman entering the room is Rotasha, her companion's identity isn't as clear.
Because of the angle of the camera, they can't really get a good look at the guy's face. All they can see is that he has a really distinctive black jacket.
Presumably, this was the mysterious William Hunt who rented the room.
Hoping to get a better look at the man when he leaves, detectives search through the tape.
The police fast forward about 2 hours.
There was an exceptionally haunting moment in this footage where you see the door swing wide open and a figure emerges, but it's not the unidentified man.
The security camera captured Rotasha trying to get out of the room. That same male figure grabbed Rotasha by the collar and violently dragged her back into the room.
She looks like she's fighting for her life.
One really cannot describe what she could have been feeling in that moment. So much fear and so much panic.
They're seeing the moments just before Rotasha was murdered.
Detectives investigating the murder of Rotasha Pryor Thomas in a Lakewood, Colorado motel room have uncovered surveillance video that appears to capture the moments leading up to the crime.
Hours after entering into the hotel room with a man named William Hunt, she can be seen frantically trying to escape.
And someone comes and drags her back into the room. And a few hours later, you see on the surveillance tape someone making a trip to the dumpster.
Based on the jacket he's wearing, it appeared to be the same man.
Unfortunately, the video is too grainy to make a clear identification. And detectives hit another roadblock when they learn the registered name, William Hunt, is likely an alias.
The manager admitted to police that a lot of their guests register under fake names.
So now it's about deciphering, okay, is this a real person?
When detectives run the name through DMV records, they come up empty.
They can't find anybody matching that description with that name.
Aliases are very common for lots of different reasons. We see them all over the place, and it kind of creates a little frustration to figure out who exactly is who, and is this a family member of the suspect? Did someone rent the room for him?
Hoping to learn more about Rotasha, detectives reach out to her family the next morning and break the news of her death.
The detectives have to notify the family. One of the hardest things that a law enforcement officer has to do.
They come inside and the first thing they ask is, how are you related to Rotasha? And when's the last time you seen her?
It is the most unnerving. It's really scary to know that they're there asking you, do you know a Rotasha? And you have to respond, yes, that's my daughter.
She's like, don't tell me nothing bad. Don't tell me nothing bad.
I knew something was wrong because she was not answering her phone, and I just knew the news wasn't good.
Ma'am, we're so sorry.
No, God, no, my baby, no, Jesus.
And that's when I started crying.
My daughter was deceased.
The family is shocked to learn about Rotasha's death. They're brokenhearted about that.
The family tells detectives that they haven't been able to reach Rotasha for 2 days.
On Halloween, she had took me trick-or-treating. And she didn't let me stay out for long because she was trying to get to her boyfriend's house. We had went home. I just remember she told me she loved me and gave me a hug and told me she'll see me in the morning and she'll bring me some more candy when I woke up.
But Rotasha never came home.
I remember waking up and it was really weird because my mom wasn't home, or like there was no sign of her being home or nothing. So we started calling her job. They were like, she didn't come in today. Me and my grandma started getting work because it was never like my mom to not call or check in.
Rotasha's mother says she had also called her daughter's boyfriend, Jarvis Gates.
He said he hadn't seen her either.
Okay. Did your daughter know anyone by the name of William Hunt?
No, not that I know of, no.
They have no idea who this William Hunt is.
And they have no idea how she ended up at the motel.
They're surprised that she's at that hotel. They don't understand why she would be there.
If you're from here, you know what the deal is with those motels. You know that no good ever comes from those places.
When detectives asked the family if Rotasha had ever made any enemies, they explained that everyone loved her. But they do mention that Rotasha had recently reconnected with her ex-boyfriend, Felix King.
Rotasha's family is saying this person she was with for several years, the relationship ended badly.
They thought she'd actually been hearing from her ex-boyfriend, Felix, and that he was wanting to get back together with her.
Apparently, Felix still had those feelings there and didn't want to let her go.
Maybe Felix had arranged to meet up with Rotasha at the motel and things hadn't worked out the way he had hoped.
Detectives suspect that might be the case when they bring Felix in for an interview.
The first thing that the detectives note is that Felix matches the description of the guy on camera. He has the same height and build.
And what Felix tells detectives raises even more suspicion.
Where were you Halloween night?
I was at home.
Can anyone verify that?
No. I was home alone, just taking it easy.
He says that he was at home watching horror movies.
Without any witnesses, there was basically no way to confirm or deny his location at the time of Rotasha's murder.
But Felix insists he had nothing to do with Rotasha's death.
Felix tells detectives that not only would he never hurt her, but he was trying to get back together with her.
He doesn't deny the fact that he still had feelings for Rotasha, and in fact said that she had seemed amenable to possibly rekindling their relationship and that they had gone and had coffee together to talk about things.
Maybe she and Felix were at a place of being able to reconcile and rekindle that romance.
He wanted to heal their relationship and make amends.
According to Felix, though, it was Rotasha who needed healing.
Felix told detectives that the last time he had run into Rotasha at the restaurant, it looked like she had been roughed up pretty bad.
Are you okay?
Felix said that he noticed Rotasha had bruises and he was concerned about it.
In Lakewood, Colorado, police are investigating the shocking murder of 32-year-old Rotasha Pryor Thomas. When they learn Rotasha may have been the victim of domestic abuse only days earlier.
Rotasha's ex-boyfriend Felix told detectives that the last time he saw her, he noticed she had a black eye.
What happened?
Oh, this is nothing. I just hit myself on the car, that's all.
Are you sure?
Felix tells police that when he asked her about it, she was kind of hesitant to tell him what had happened.
That is very difficult to talk about, even with your most trusted confidant.
Felix claims that Rotasha had eventually told him the truth.
Felix told detectives that Rotasha admitted that it was her boyfriend Jarvis who had gotten physical with her, and that's why she had bruising.
According to Felix, Jarvis had supposedly choked Rotasha.
Apparently, he's been getting increasingly violent with her over the course of her relationship.
And she said that this guy had choked her.
That's what she said.
Felix's claims are telling, especially when detectives get the results of Rotasha's autopsy.
The medical examiner noticed bruising on her neck. He noticed petechiae around her eyes, blood in her stomach.
She lost her life due to asphyxiation.
After talking to Felix, detectives follow up with Rotasha's family.
Detectives asked about Felix's claims about Jarvis being abusive, but the family said they really hadn't gotten to know Jarvis.
Rotasha was a private, personal person when it came to relationships. She didn't really share too much.
Rotasha's family tells detectives that they never witnessed any abuse firsthand.
I don't think it would have been a very positive reaction had I seen him putting his hands on my daughter.
But her family says that Rotasha's relationship with Jarvis had other problems.
Jarvis was insensitive, always had an attitude, always constantly upset, and he treated her as if he had ownership of her.
Intimate partner violence, it's complex. Oftentimes, people get very isolated in these types of relationships. Some of that is on the part of the perpetrator, and I think some of that is on the part of the victim as well.
A lot of individuals in these type of relationships kind of get themselves caught because you start in this honeymoon stage where the perpetrator will essentially facilitate or create this illusion of safety and stability.
I was thinking, like, why do you let him run over you like this? Like, you're a grown woman. You should be able to stick up for yourself and say what you want to say, when you want to say it, how you want to say it. It would make me mad because him as a man should know better. There's no way you should be talking disrespectful.
I just didn't understand what she saw in him.
Even more troubling for detectives, looking into Jarvis's past, reveals a history of domestic assault.
He has several felonies on his record, including several instances of domestic violence in other relationships.
One of those charges is really interesting to the police because it was just a couple years before that he had assaulted a different ex-girlfriend at a motel. The ex-girlfriend says he even started choking her.
It was eerily similar to Rotasha's murder, if not the exact same circumstances.
But unlike Rotasha, Jarvis's ex-girlfriend had been lucky.
She was able to get away, run to the lobby, and call police.
She ran out, and that's how she got away, or else she would be dead.
With this new information, detectives placed Jarvis at the top of their suspect list in Rotasha's murder.
After reviewing all of the information in this file, it seems that this is not something that is new to him.
This is a serial violent offender. It's somebody who has offended repeatedly and has developed a pattern of offense.
Just rational thinking tells you it happened before. So yeah, it was definitely a cycle.
Police immediately track Jarvis down at his home in Lakewood and bring him in for questioning. When detectives begin pressing him about his relationship with Rotasha, he doesn't deny what they've uncovered.
When they sit down to interview him, he says, yes, I've had a troubled past, but I had nothing to do with Rotasha's death.
Look, I know I messed up in the past, but that's all behind me now.
Jarvis said that with Rotasha, he'd really been trying to make a fresh start and do things right this time.
I love Tasha. I'd never do anything to hurt her.
When's the last time you talked to her?
During the day on Halloween.
Jarvis tells police that he and Rotasha were supposed to go to a Halloween party together that night, but that she never showed up.
He said that he was waiting for her at his home, that they were going to meet around 8 p.m.
Jarvis says when Rotasha didn't show up, he tried calling her.
And she never showed?
No.
Jarvis tells detectives that after waiting around for an hour or so, he'd gone to the party alone.
Jarvis said he had gotten there at like 9 o'clock.
He says he didn't see her that night at all.
Did you try to call her the next day?
Nah, I thought maybe she was mad at me.
Despite his claims, detectives aren't buying Jarvis's story.
Given what they heard from Rotasha's family about how overbearing and controlling he was, they found it hard to believe that Jarvis would just sit and wait for her to call him.
But while detectives suspect Jarvis is lying, they'll need more evidence to charge him with murder. While police hold Jarvis in custody, detectives begin digging into his alibi.
They start talking to people who were at the Halloween party. People there said that Jarvis did come to the Halloween party, but he didn't get there until after midnight.
That's a 3-hour time difference.
The fact that he did not attend said party until after midnight does give him plenty of time to be able to commit the crime and still make it to that party.
Now the question is, can detectives prove where Jarvis had been?
They remember that they found that receipt in the motel garbage.
The chicken was purchased at 6:30 p.m. at a local grocery store. The police went to that grocery store to find out if Rotasha had purchased it or if someone else had purchased that chicken.
The chicken was actually bought with a gift card, and so there are no records to show police who it was.
But there is surveillance video.
They were able to see the transaction take place.
And unlike the video from the motel, there was no mistaking the man leaving the grocery store.
It was Jarvis who purchased that chicken.
Detectives in Lakewood, Colorado have discovered security video that connects Jarvis Gates to the motel room where his girlfriend Rotasha Pryor Thomas was murdered.
Just a few hours before the murder, a grocery store security camera recorded him purchasing the takeout fried chicken that detectives found in the room.
Being able to find that same bucket of chicken in the room does essentially debunk his statement of not having contact with her that day.
Hoping to prove he was the man seen entering the motel room with Rotasha, detectives subpoenaed Jarvis's cell phone records.
now they're able to see Jarvis's cell phone's movements during the night in question.
Cell phone towers will ping and record a phone's location if it's in use. And fortunately for detectives, Jarvis kept his phone on and with him all night long on Halloween.
They're able to see that that cell phone went to the convenience store and to the motel as well.
The phone data also confirms what the people at the Halloween party previously told detectives, that Jarvis didn't arrive at 9 as he'd claimed.
It shows he ended up going to that party well after midnight.
Jarvis's phone isn't the only thing that puts him at the crime scene either.
The most powerful evidence comes when the police get the results back from the forensic testing.
Jarvis's DNA and his fingerprints were found all over the hotel room in which Rotasha was killed. They know, based on the surveillance camera footage, that nobody else entered that hotel room after Jarvis left.
All of the evidence that the detectives have, the surveillance, the chicken bucket that was found, the sheets that were found, all of it does point to Jarvis being Rotasha's killer.
It's enough to charge Jarvis, but not before they collect one more valuable piece of evidence.
The officers go to the warehouse where Jarvis works and searched some of Jarvis's property that was at work. They located a black jacket that matched perfectly the jacket that the male was wearing when he entered Rotasha's hotel room.
After collecting the jacket, the detective sit Jarvis down for another interview.
You need to start being straight with us, Jarvis.
We know you were at the motel with Tasha.
And they confront him with some of the evidence that they found. Jarvis quickly starts to change his story.
Jarvis admits to police that he wasn't telling the truth when he was brought in the first time and says that's because he was scared that they were going to try to pin the murder on him, but now he's ready to tell them what really happened.
Jarvis also admits that he rented the motel room.
But it was registered to a man named William Hunt.
I used a fake ID.
Jarvis said that he rented the room to meet Rotasha, but Rotasha had been on board with the plan.
Jarvis tells police that his relationship with Rotasha had been in some trouble. He thought that having a night away together might help them.
A little one-on-one time?
Yeah, I thought maybe we could work things out.
But Jarvis says they never got a chance to talk things over.
Jarvis told police that this romantic evening he had planned didn't go the way he thought it would.
What happened?
She started getting at me.
He said Rotasha was the one that was being hostile and aggressive.
According to Jarvis, Rotasha accused him of cheating on her.
Baby, I missed you.
I know you've been messing around.
Jarvis said he denied the accusation, but that Rotasha didn't believe him.
You know what, Jarvis? I am so sick and tired of you lying.
He said that Rotasha got angry at him.
There was an argument that broke out, and things got out of control, things got really violent.
Jarvis says that Rotasha was so angry, he actually had to physically defend himself.
We saw you on the video, Jarvis.
She tried to run and you stopped her.
I know what it looks like, but I swear I tried to help her.
Jarvis tells police that he did drag her back in the room, but then decided to leave and just let her cool off.
He said because she was so angry and she was starting to get physical, he knew that he needed to leave.
According to his account, he did not kill her.
Then how did she die, Jarvis?
Man, I don't know.
Well, she didn't choke herself.
Somebody must have gone in there after I left.
In Lakewood, Colorado, Jarvis Gates has admitted that he was in the motel room the night his girlfriend, Rotasha Pryor Thomas, died. But he tells police that doesn't make him a murderer.
According to his account, Rotasha was violent against him, and so he was acting in self-defense.
Even then, he denied killing Rotasha.
He said after he left, he didn't go back, and he didn't know that she'd been killed until the next morning.
Despite his repeated claims of innocence, detectives don't believe a word of Jarvis's story.
If Jarvis never intended to do any harm to Rotasha, why did he use the name William Hunt when he rented the room instead of his real name?
They know, based on the surveillance camera footage, that nobody else entered that hotel room after Jarvis left. So the police aren't buying his story at all.
Jarvis had a history of abusing other women. He had been to court before and charged before with abuse.
In fact, Rotasha's murder was eerily similar to an earlier assault on an ex-girlfriend.
The assault against his ex-girlfriend at a hotel shows same MO. It's just that this ended in Rotasha losing her life.
At the end of the interview, detectives booked Jarvis for murder.
Jarvis was charged with first-degree murder and also second-degree kidnapping. And that stems from dragging Rotasha back into the room when she was trying to get away.
In April 2021, Jarvis goes on trial for murder in a Jefferson County courtroom. The prosecutor opens by arguing that Rotasha died because Jarvis refused to let her walk away.
Rotasha and Jarvis's relationship was becoming increasingly rocky over the weeks prior to the murder.
The prosecution said that Rotasha had been thinking about leaving Jarvis and getting back with her ex.
But Jarvis wasn't going to allow that to happen.
On the night of the murder, the prosecutors say that Jarvis lured Rotasha to the motel room.
She was lured to that hotel under the pretenses of trying to work out the relationship issues that they were having.
Obviously, she didn't know what was going to happen that night.
Prosecutors believe that once they were inside the room, Jarvis delivered some sort of ultimatum.
He possibly felt that fear of losing what he perceived as his mind to control. So essentially looking at Rotasha and perhaps even her children as if they're a piece of property. And it seems as though that was it for her. And she was like, I'm done.
Don't walk away from me.
Let go of me! Let go of me!
She can be seen frantically trying to escape, but she's tackled by Jarvis and dragged back into the hotel room.
It's hard to think that someone you're dating, someone you love, would be that violent.
Based on the forensic evidence, prosecutors believe Jarvis pushed Rotasha onto the bed and began savagely beating her,
splattering her blood on the headboard and on the sheets.
Then, he strangled her to death.
He murdered my daughter.
Once Rotasha was dead, Jarvis removed her clothes and tried to cover up the crime.
He then drug her body to the bathtub to try to wash away the evidence, and then discarded the bloody sheets.
He had been seen on camera taking items from the room to a dumpster.
When it's the defense's turn, they don't deny that Jarvis killed Rotasha.
All of the evidence, the surveillance, the chicken bucket that was found, the sheets that were found, all of it does point to Jarvis being in the room.
Instead, the defense claims that Jarvis never intended to kill Rotasha.
The defense says that there's actually no evidence that Jarvis premeditated this murder.
The defense said that it was just this crime of passion. Things got out of hand.
The defense even suggests that Rotasha's death was accidental.
The defense, for those reasons, argue that the charges should be reduced to manslaughter.
The jury, however, sides with the prosecution.
The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder.
Jarvis is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The outcome is a relief to Rotasha's family.
I just cried because it was a very euphoric, happy feeling knowing that he's gone forever. He can't hurt nobody anymore.
I was very happy to know that Jarvis would spend the remainder of his useless life behind bars until he dies. I'm very pleased with that. He has a lot of time to think about his actions now.
Rotasha's family also has
The darkness that blankets the rolling hills of Pike County, Ohio, is not the gentle, velvet twilight of a city park, but a thick, primordial ink that seems to seep out from the very roots of the ancient hickory and oak trees that choke the Appalachian foothills. On the night of April 21st, 2016, this darkness felt particularly heavy, a humid, stagnant weight that clung to the hollows and suppressed the usual chorus of spring peepers and distant coyotes. To understand what happened as the clock ticked toward the early hours of Friday morning, you must first understand the silence of Union Hill Road. It is a winding, gravel-dusted artery that snakes through the dense woods, connecting a series of modest trailers and prefabricated homes that sit like lonely islands in a sea of shadow. Here, the distance between neighbors is measured not in feet, but in the thickness of the forest and the strength of the bloodlines that have tilled this soil for generations. The air that night carried the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, a deceptive aroma of rural peace that masked the calculated, rhythmic approach of a predator that didn't just walk the land, but was a part of its very DNA. Imagine the interior of the first trailer, where Christopher Roden Sr. and his cousin Gary lay in the heavy, unbothered sleep of men who spent their days in hard, manual labor. The television in the corner might have been left on, casting a low, jaundiced flicker across the linoleum floor and the half-empty soda cans on the laminate counter. There was no sound of a forced door, no shattering of glass to announce a threat. Instead, there was only the soft, almost imperceptible groan of floorboards yielding to a familiar weight. The killer moved through the cramped hallway with a terrifying, surgical precision, guided by a knowledge of the floor's every creak and the specific layout of the rooms. The show, don't tell, of this moment is not in a scream, but in its absence. There was no struggle, no frantic scramble for a weapon. There was only the cold, metallic click of a customized suppressor and the muffled, thumping discharge that signaled the erasure of a life before the victim could even process the transition from dreams to eternity. The blood didn't spray. It pooled, a dark, viscous liquid that began to soak into the fabric of the mattress, its copper tang rising to meet the stale air of the bedroom. By the time the moon began its slow descent behind the jagged tree-line, the violence had moved like a contagion down the road. In a second trailer, Clarence Frankie Roden and his fiancée, Hannah Hazel Gilly, were cocooned in their own domestic sanctuary. Between them lay their 6-month-old son, his tiny, rhythmic breathing the only sound in a room that was about to be desecrated. The predator entered this space with a heart of absolute stone. As the gun was raised, the moonlight catching only the dull matte finish of the barrel, the focus remained on the execution-style delivery. The shots were clinical, aimed with the chilling intent to ensure that neither parent would ever wake up to hear their child cry again. The horror, here, is found in the stillness. When the echoes of the suppressed fire died down, the 6-month-old remained, his pajamas stained with a warmth that was not his own, his wide, uncomprehending eyes staring into a darkness that had just claimed his entire world. The killer stood there for a heartbeat, perhaps adjusting a mask or checking a watch, before stepping over the carnage and vanishing back into the Appalachian mist. The tragedy deepened as the night progressed, reaching the home of Dana Roden, where she slept alongside her younger children. 19-year-old Hannah and 16-year-old Chris Jr. Dana was the fierce, protective heart of the Roden clan, a woman whose life was a series of sacrifices for the people under her roof. In her bedroom, the violence was repetitive and personal. Hannah, who had given birth to a daughter only 4 days prior, lay in a state of postnatal exhaustion, her body still healing, her infant tucked safely against her side. The killer showed no mercy for the sanctity of new life. The barrel was leveled, the breath held, and the trigger pulled with a callousness that defies the imagination. As Hannah's life faded, the 4-day-old infant continued to nurse or sleep, unaware that the warmth of her mother was turning cold, and that the rhythmic heartbeat she had known since the womb had been silenced by a man who had once been a constant presence in her family's life. The infant was left in the gore, a living miracle in a house that had become a tomb, her tiny cries muffled by the thick walls and the indifference of the surrounding woods. The final stop on this map of slaughter was the isolated home of Kenneth Roden, miles away from the main cluster on Union Hill Road. The distance was irrelevant to a predator driven by a singular, obsessive mission. Kenneth was found much later, his death a solitary punctuation mark at the end of a long night of coordinated butchery. 8 people, spanning 3 generations of a single family, had been eliminated with a level of logistical sophistication that suggested not just a murderer, but a paramilitary operation. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a long, jaundiced light over the hollows of Pike County, the morning fog didn't just hide the trailers. It seemed to hold the breath of an entire community. The first person to walk into one of those homes, expecting the smell of morning coffee and the sound of a waking family, would instead be met with a silence so profound it felt like a physical blow. The scream that eventually broke that silence would be one that echoed all the way to the governor's office, signaling the start of the largest, most expensive criminal investigation in the history of Ohio. This is the hook of the Pike County Massacre, the sheer, unfathomable scale of the betrayal. In a place where family is the only currency that matters, a whole family, the Wagners, had allegedly sat around their own kitchen table, not to pray or to plan a future, but to meticulously map out the execution of their friends and neighbors. They had spent months obsessing over every detail, from the calibers of the bullets to the specific paths through the woods that would avoid detection. The motive was not gold or power in the traditional sense, but a twisted, possessive grip on a child, a girl named Sophia. To ensure they had total control over her, they decided that her entire maternal bloodline had to be wiped from the face of the earth. The horror lies in the banality of their evil, the way they could tuck their own children into bed, then go out and leave other children to starve in the arms of their dead mothers. The Pike County Massacre is a story of 2 families bound by history and blood, and how that bond was turned into a noose. It is a study in the darkness of the human heart when it is fueled by isolation and a warped sense of justice. As we move through the winding roads of this narrative, we will see the forensic puzzles that stumped the best investigators for years. We will look into the eyes of the Wagnons, searching for a flicker of humanity in a void of calculated cruelty. We will walk through the trailers of the Rodens, feeling the lingering energy of a family that was erased in a single, humid night. The atmosphere is one of stagnant dread, where every rustle in the leaves could be a neighbor coming to help, or a neighbor coming to kill. The sensory details of that morning discovery are etched into the collective memory of the county. The sight of a blood-stained doorway reflecting the early light, the sound of a dog whining low in its throat as it paced outside a silent home, and the overwhelming, metallic scent of a life interrupted. When the first 911 call came in, the dispatcher's voice was calm, but the caller was a raw nerve of panic, a person who had seen the unthinkable and was struggling to find the words to describe it. "There's blood everywhere," they whispered, a phrase that would become the mantra of the investigation. As the police tape began to crisscross Union Hill Road, the residents of Pike County locked their doors and loaded their shotguns, realizing that the monster they feared wasn't a stranger from the city, but might very well be the person they had waved to at the grocery store the day before. The pacing of this tragedy is a slow, agonizing crawl from the darkness of the night into the blinding, horrific clarity of the day. Each new discovery added a fresh layer of impossibility. One scene was a tragedy, 4 scenes was a war. The show, don't tell, of the killer's intent is seen in the way the infants were spared. It wasn't an act of mercy, but a cold, strategic choice. The children they wanted to keep were left alive, while the people who loved them were executed. This selective slaughter reveals a psychology of ownership that is more terrifying than a random act of madness. It shows a family that believed they were the law, the judge, and the executioner, operating under the canopy of the Appalachian woods where they thought no one would ever find them. As we delve deeper into this kitsch ban, we must hold on to the image of those 2 infants. They are the silent witnesses to the greatest massacre in Ohio's history. They represent the life that survives even when the world is burning down around it. The story of the Rodens and the Wagners is not just a crime report. It is a modern-day Greek tragedy set in the rugged heart of America. It is a tale of obsession, of the protection, of a child turned into a death warrant for 8, and of a multi-year hunt for a truth that was buried under layers of family secrets and rural silence. The fog is lifting over Union Hill Road, but the shadows it leaves behind are long, and they are filled with the ghosts of a family that never saw the dawn. The emotional core of the opening is the profound sense of broken trust. In Pike County, your neighbor is your safety net. They are the one who pulls your truck out of the mud or brings a casserole when you're sick. To have that safety net turned into a trap is a psychological violation that the community still hasn't fully recovered from. We see the Wagners not as cartoonish villains, but as a unit, a family that functioned as a singular, lethal organism. The mother, the father, the sons, all moving in a synchronized dance of death. This collective participation is the most haunting aspect of the case. How does a mother agree to the murder of another mother? How does a brother help kill the woman his brother once loved? These are the questions that will haunt the following chapters. The darkness of the Appalachian Thung Lung is vast, and it hides many things. It hides the rusted remains of old cars, the secrets of illegal grow-ops, and the quiet-mouthed one of people who have lived too close for too long. But on April 22, 2016, it gave up a secret so dark it threatened to consume the entire region. The Pike County Massacre was a declaration of war against the very idea of community. As the sirens began to wail and the helicopters hovered over the Treeline, the world looked at this small corner of Ohio and saw a nightmare made flesh. The kitsch band of their lives had been rewritten in blood, and the ending was still years away, hidden in a trailer in Alaska and under the murky waters of a farm pond. The sensory transition from the humid, silent night to the frantic, blue-lit morning is the bridge into our story. We will walk that bridge together, feeling the grit of the Union Hill Road gravel under our feet and the chill of the morning air on our skin. We will listen for the cries of the babies and the silence of the dead. We will search for the why in a landscape that offers only how. This is the Pike County Massacre, a story that begins with a family in the dark and ends with a reckoning that the hills of Ohio will never forget. The hook is set, the blood is dry, and the investigation is about to begin. Imagine the sheer audacity of the plan. 4 different locations miles apart, hit with such timing that no one could call for help. This required a level of surveillance and reconnaissance that mirrors an intelligence operation. The killers knew when Chris Sr. would be home. They knew Dana's work schedule. They knew Frankie's habits. They were the shadows in the woods, watching and waiting for the perfect moment of vulnerability. This is the show, Don't Tell, of their obsession. They didn't just hate the rodents, they studied them. They lived in their pockets until they were ready to cut them. The Pike County Massacre is a testament to the fact that the most dangerous enemy is the one who knows you best. As we conclude this opening, the images of the night linger. The matte black barrel of a suppressed pistol, the glowing screen of a television in a silent trailer, the tiny hand of a 4-day-old infant reaching out in the dark, and the calculated, rhythmic footsteps of a family of killers walking back to their truck, convinced they had finally secured their future. They thought they had committed the perfect crime because they knew the land and they knew the people. But the land has a way of holding onto the truth, and the silence of Pike County was about to become a roar. The odyssey of justice for the 8 souls of Union Hill Road starts now, in the blood, in the mist, and in the heart of a broken community. To understand the brutal choreography of the Pike County Massacre, one must first surrender to the oppressive, cloistered geography of southern Ohio, a place where the rolling majesty of the Appalachian foothills masks a landscape of deep-seated poverty, fierce familial isolation, and a silence that is as thick and heavy as the morning fog that clings to the Scioto River. Pike County is not the manicured, suburban Ohio of white picket fences and soccer complexes. It is a world of jagged hollows and narrow, serpentine roads that wind through dense forests of hickory and oak, where the sunlight struggles to reach the valley floor even on the brightest summer days. The setting of this tragedy is Union Hill Road, a remote, gravel-dusted artery that serves as the backbone of a community where survival is a generational labor and the law of the land is often dictated by the names on the mailboxes rather than the statutes in the courthouse. Here, The homes are predominantly mobile trailers and prefabricated structures, perched precariously on cleared patches of dirt or tucked away behind screens of rusted machinery and overgrown brush, creating a sense of temporary shelter in a wild, unforgiving terrain. The air in the spring of 2016 was saturated with the smell of damp pine, wood smoke, and the metallic tang of old engine oil, a sensory tapestry that spoke of a life lived in constant, gritty contact with the elements. In these hollows, distance is a psychological weapon. The spaces between the 4 crime scenes were not just measured in miles of winding road, but in the absolute visual isolation provided by the ridges and the trees, ensuring that a gunshot in one trailer would be swallowed by the vast, unfeeling silence of the woods before it could ever reach the ears of a neighbor. This is a region defined by the hollow mentality, a social code born of historical neglect and geographic enclosure, where trust is a rare commodity reserved strictly for those of shared blood, and where minding one's business is not just a polite suggestion but a survival mechanism. The Rodens were a family that embodied this Appalachian grit, living in a cluster of homes that functioned almost as a private compound, their lives intertwined through shared work in the local demolition and auto-scrapping trades, their world revolving around the rhythms of the land and the tight-knit bonds of their clan. To an outsider, the landscape might look like a postcard of rural desolation, but to those who lived there, every curve in Union Hill Road was a memory, and every darkened patch of woods was a familiar haunt. The setting was an unwitting accomplice to the killers, providing the perfect cloak for a paramilitary-style execution. The lack of streetlights meant the night was a total, obsidian void, and the gravel driveways, while noisy under tires, were easily bypassed by those who knew the secret paths through the timber. There is a specific kind of atmospheric pressure in Pike County, a feeling of being watched by the hills themselves, where the rustle of a deer in the undergrowth or the distant creak of a trailer's frame settling in the night can sound like a warning. The socioeconomic reality of the area added another layer to the setting, as the struggle for resources and the prevalence of underground economies, marijuana grow-ops, and cockfighting rings created a backdrop of low-level paranoia and a distrust of formal authority. The Wagners and the Rodens lived in this pressure cooker together, 2 families whose histories were as tangled as the briars in the ravines, their lives defined by the same harsh beauty and the same uncompromising isolation. On the night of the murders, the setting was a trap. The trailers, with their thin aluminum walls and compact layouts, offered no protection against a determined intruder who knew exactly which door led to which bedroom. The silence of the night was so absolute that it acted as a vacuum, allowing the killers to move with a terrifying, rhythmic efficiency from one scene to the next without alerting the county at large. Even as the sun began to rise on April 22nd, the hills seemed to hold onto the secret of the massacre, the gray mist lingering in the valleys like a shroud, obscuring the carnage until the first family member walked into a world that had been irrevocably altered. The setting is not merely a backdrop for this kitsch band. It is the source of the conflict, a place where a dispute over a child could escalate into a blood feud because, in the isolation of the hollows, family is the only thing that provides a sense of power or permanence. The rust on the old trucks, the weeds choking the porches, and the vast, unblinking eyes of the Appalachian forest all bear witness to a culture where loyalty is absolute and the price of betrayal is paid in the currency of the hills. As the investigators eventually flooded the area, they found themselves in a landscape that was actively resistant to their presence, a maze of unmapped trails and tight-lipped residents who viewed the blue lights of the police cruisers with the same suspicion they afforded a predatory animal. The setting of Pike County remains a haunting, beautiful, and terrifying participant in the narrative, a place where the darkness under the treeline is never truly gone, and where the echoes of that April night are still whispered by the wind through the Union Hill hollows. To walk these roads today is to feel the weight of those 8 souls, their presence still etched into the sensory details of the land, the crunch of the gravel, the smell of the damp earth, and the overwhelming, terrifying silence of a world that can swallow a family whole without leaving a trace in the morning light. The setting was the stage, the armor, and ultimately the grave of the Rodens, a testament to the fact that in the deep country of Ohio, the land remembers what the people are too afraid to say. To look at the Roden family was to see the very pulse and marrow of Pike County, a clan woven so tightly into the rugged fabric of the Appalachian foothills that it was impossible to tell where the people ended and the land began. They were not a family of headlines or high-gloss achievements, but a family of the earth, defined by the grit under their fingernails, the calluses on their palms, and an unshakable, ancestral loyalty that functioned as both their greatest shield and their eventual vulnerability. In the clearing along Union Hill Road, the Rodens didn't just live. They persisted, carving out a life from a world of rusted metal, demolition yards, and the relentless, seasonal labor of the rural poor. They were a sprawling, multi-generational organism, a collection of individuals whose identities were so inextricably linked that a blow to one was felt by the entire bloodline. To tell the story of the victims is to step away from the blood-stained forensic reports and into the warmth of their kitchens, the grease of their garages, and the quiet, fierce hopes they held for a future that was being systematically stolen from them by the very neighbors they considered friends. At the head of this clan stood Christopher Roden Sr., a 40-year-old man who carried the physical weight of Pike County in his broad shoulders and weathered face. Chris Sr. was the engine of the family, a man of relentless movement and mechanical intuition who saw potential in things the rest of the world had discarded. His world was one of scrap metal, demolition sites, and the constant, rhythmic hum of engines being brought back to life. He was a man who moved with a deliberate, heavy-footed confidence, his hands permanently stained with the gray-black oil of 1,000 projects. To the community, he was the guy you called when a truck wouldn't start or a structure needed to be cleared, a man of few words but absolute reliability. In the private geography of his family, he was the anchor, providing a sense of stability in an environment that was often economically precarious. He possessed a quiet, stoic pride, a man who worked from sunrise to long after the valley shadows had turned to night, all to ensure that the cluster of trailers on Union Hill Road remained a sanctuary for his children and his kin. Living and working alongside him was his cousin, Gary Roden, a 38-year-old who functioned as Chris Sr. as shadow and constant companion. Gary was a man of the periphery, a quiet soul whose loyalty was as deep as the ravines surrounding their homes. He was often found in the passenger seat of Chris's truck or in the middle of a demolition site, his presence a steady, unspoken constant in the family's daily grind. Gary didn't have a household of his own in the traditional sense. His home was the Roden family itself. He was the cousin who was always there, the one who helped with the heavy lifting and shared the silent camaraderie of the workday. In the eyes of the world, he might have been just another man in a camo jacket, but within the family, he was a vital thread in the tapestry, a man whose life was defined by the simple, profound act of being present and being kin. If Chris Sr. was the engine, Dana Roden was the heart and the resilient spine of the family. At 37, Dana was a woman of fierce, protective energy, her life a tireless marathon of service to her children and her community. She worked as a nurse's aide, a role that required a specific kind of Appalachian toughness, the ability to provide tenderness in a world that offered very little of it. Her hands, when not busy at the nursing home, were constantly in motion at home, managing the chaotic, loving logistics of a household with 3 children. Dana was the one who kept the peace, who pushed for education, and who held the dreams of her children in her own tired hands. She had a laugh that could cut through the Appalachian mist, and a gaze that was both weary and unyielding. Even though she and Chris Sr. had lived in separate trailers, their lives remained a singular, co-parenting unit, a testament to the fact that in Pike County, the bonds of family often transcended the formal boundaries of marriage. The next generation of the Roden legacy was embodied by Clarence Frankie Roden and his fiancée, Hannah Hazel Gilley. Frankie, at 20, was a mirror image of his father, hardworking, mechanically inclined, and possessing a quiet, budding maturity that came from being a new father himself. He lived in a trailer just up the road, a space he was turning into a home for Hannah and their 6-month-old son. Frankie was a man on the cusp of his own patriarchhood, his days filled with the labor of the auto-scrapping trade and his evenings defined by the soft, rhythmic domesticity of a young family. Hannah Gilley, also 20, was the light in Frankie's world, a young mother whose life was entirely centered on the tiny life they had created together. She was the one who brought a softer energy to the rugged Roden clearing, a woman whose social media was a gallery of baby photos and the simple, profound joys of a life starting out. Together, they represented the hope of a new branch on the Roden tree, a young couple who believed that through hard work and loyalty, they could build a world of their own in the hills. At the center of the storm that was brewing in the shadows stood Hannah Roden, the 19-year-old daughter whose life was a study in fierce independence and maternal devotion. Hannah was a young woman of the new Appalachia, ambitious, pursuing a degree in nursing, and possessing a sharp, clear-eyed understanding of the world around her. She was a mother to 2 young daughters, the eldest being Sophia, the child whose very existence would become the catalyst for the massacre. Hannah's love for her children was a physical force. She was a woman who would not be bullied or controlled, especially when it came to the safety and future of her girls. She was the one who had dared to break away from the suffocating, possessive grip of the Wagner family, seeking a life that was defined by her own choices rather than their dictates. In the months leading up to that April night, Hannah was a woman in transition, balancing the grueling demands of nursing school with the constant, joyful labor of motherhood, unaware that her desire for a normal, independent life was being viewed by her neighbors as a capital offense. The youngest of the immediate Roden siblings was Christopher Roden Jr., a 16-year-old boy who was the essence of suburban youth caught in a rural landscape. Chris Jr. was a high school student, a kid who loved his siblings and was just beginning to find his own rhythm in the world. He was the one who still carried a glimmer of childhood innocence, the one who wasn't yet hardened by the demolition yards or the heavy labor of his father and brother. He was a son of the hills, yes, but he was also a kid of the digital age, his world filled with the typical concerns of a teenager, friends, school, and the looming horizon of adulthood. His presence in the family was a reminder of what they were all working for, the chance for the next generation to have a life that was a little bit easier, a little bit lighter than the one their parents had known. The final victim of the Union Hill slaughter was Kenneth Roden, Chris Sr.'s 44-year-old brother, who lived in a secluded trailer several miles away. Kenneth was a man of the woods, a quiet, solitary figure who lived a life of simple, rural independence. He was the older brother, the one who had watched the family grow and shift from his own quiet corner of the county. His connection to the events of that night was purely biological. He was a Roden, and in the twisted, scorched-earth logic of the killers, that was enough to mark him for execution. Kenneth's death was a punctuation mark of absolute, senseless cruelty, a reminder that the killers weren't just targeting individuals, but were attempting to surgically remove an entire bloodline from the map of Pike County. To understand the Rodens is to see the show, don't tell, of their daily existence. It was the sight of the heavy, mud-caked work boots lined up on the porch of Chris Sr.'s trailer, each pair telling a story of a day spent battling the land. It was the sound of the wind whistling through the gaps in the trailers, a constant, low-frequency hum that was eventually drowned out by the cries of the infants on that April morning. It was the smell of wood smoke and damp earth that permeated Dana's kitchen, a sensory record of a life lived in the hollows. The Rodens were a family of texture and sound, the clinking of tools, the roaring of truck engines, the sharp, bright laughter of the children, and the deep, heavy silence of the woods that surrounded them. They were a family that valued doing over saying, a clan that expressed their love through the sharing of a meal, the fixing of a radiator, or the fierce, unspoken protection of their own. The tragedy of the Roden family is not just in the manner of their deaths, but in the erasure of their specific, Appalachian humanity. They were often portrayed in the media through the lens of their underground activities, the marijuana plants found on the property, the cockfighting rings, stereotypes that allowed the world to view them as other or lesser. But these details were merely the coping mechanisms of a family living in a region where the traditional economy had long since collapsed. To the people who knew them, The Rodens were the family who would give you the shirt off their back, the ones who would spend their last dollar to help a neighbor in need. Their criminality was a symptom of their environment, but their character was a product of their hearts. They were a family of deep, abiding kindness, a group of people who found joy in the simple, gritty reality of their lives. When the killers entered those trailers, they weren't just attacking individuals, they were attempting to kill a way of life. They were targeting the very idea of the Appalachian Clan, the loyalty, the resilience, and the refusal to be controlled. The show, Don't Tell, of the victim's strength is found in the infants who were left alive. It was as if the killers knew that they could never truly erase the Roden spirit, so they tried to steal its future instead. The 4-day-old baby girl and the 6-month-old boy were the final, living fragments of a family that had been shattered in a single, humid night. They were the survivors of an attempted genocide of a name, a biological record of a family that had been loved and was now gone. The psychological landscape of the Roden family was one of us against the world. In a county that often felt forgotten by the state and the nation, the Rodens relied on each other with an intensity that was almost religious. This closeness was their greatest asset, providing a sense of belonging and purpose in a world that offered very little of either. But it also made them a stationary target. Because they lived so close, because their lives were so intertwined, the killers were able to map out their deaths with a terrifying logistical ease. The Rodens' loyalty was exploited by the Wagners, who used their status as friends and neighbors to gain the intimate knowledge required to execute 8 people in a single night without a single alarm being raised. Hannah Roden's story is the most poignant of all. She was a woman who was trying to break the cycle of control, a mother who wanted a different life for her daughters. She was the one who saw the darkness in the Wagner family and had the courage to say no. Her refusal to yield her child to their obsessive, patriarchal grip was the catalyst for the massacre. In the show, Don't Tell, of the days leading up to her death, we see a young woman of immense strength, studying for her nursing exams, caring for a newborn, and standing her ground against a family that believed they owned her. She was the primary target, the woman whose death was meant to be the final word in a custody dispute. The fact that her entire family was killed alongside her is a testament to the sheer, narcissistic rage of the killers. They didn't just want Hannah dead, they wanted to erase the very environment that had given her the strength to resist them. The sensory details of the victims' lives remain as a haunting legacy in the hollows of Pike County. The faded paint on the trailers, the overgrown gardens where Dana once grew her vegetables, and the rusted remains of the cars Frankie was working on. These are the monuments to the Roden family. They were a family of movement and noise, and the silence that now hangs over Union Hill Road is a physical weight, a constant reminder of the lives that were silenced. To tell their story is to perform an act of restoration, pulling them out of the statistics and the stereotypes and back into the vibrant, complicated reality of their Appalachian lives. They were the Rodens, a family of the hills, a clan of the earth, and a people whose names deserve to be remembered not for how they died, but for how fiercely they loved each other while they lived. As we move toward the incident and the investigation, we must hold onto the faces of these 8 people. We must remember the grease on Chris Sr.'s hands, the tired kindness in Dana's eyes, the young love of Frankie and Hannah Gilly, and the fierce maternal fire in Hannah Roden. They were not just victims. They were the heart of a community, a family that embodied the absolute best and the absolute hardest parts of life in the Appalachian foothills. Their story is a tragedy of blood and betrayal, a narrative that asks us what happens when the bonds of neighborliness are replaced by the chains of obsession. The Rodens were the soul of Union Hill Road, and the silence they left behind is a roar that Pike County will be hearing for generations to come. The morning light is breaking over the hollows, but the people who should be waking up to its warmth are gone, their futures buried in the damp earth of the hills they once called home. The night of April 21st, 2016, began with a chilling, ritualistic preparation inside the Wagner family farmhouse, a scene that felt less like a domestic evening and more like the assembly of a ghost squad. To understand the incident phase of the Pike County massacre, one must look at the meticulously calculated steps taken by Billy, Angela, George IV and Jake Wagner, a family that had transformed itself into a singular, lethal organism. The air in their home was thick with the chemical, acrid scent of black hair dye, of vanity of violence, as they darkened their features to blend into the Appalachian shadows. They moved with a practiced, hushed efficiency, taping the soles of their shoes to obscure tread patterns and checking the matte black finishes of their suppressed firearms. This was not a sudden eruption of rage. It was a paramilitary operation conceived in the cold, narrow-minded basement of obsession. They had spent months studying the Rhoden family's habits, mapping the gravel arteries of Union Hill Road, and even purchasing specific kill trucks with modified floorboards to conceal their weapons and equipment. As they piled into the vehicle, the weight of their intent was a physical presence, a stagnant pressure that would soon explode across 4 different locations in the dark heart of the hollow. The drive toward Union Hill Road was a journey through a landscape they knew as well as their own reflection. The winding, tree-choked roads were familiar haunts, and as they neared the first target, the trailer of Christopher Rhoden Sr., they bypassed the traditional driveways, instead utilizing the secret, wooded paths that only a local would know. The night was an obsidian void, the air saturated with the humid promise of a spring storm, but the Wagners saw the world through the jaundiced, glowing green of night vision goggles. This technology turned the rural sanctuary into a skeletal battlefield, where the heat signatures of the sleeping Rhodens were the only markers that mattered. They didn't need to break down doors. They moved through the darkness with the confidence of ghosts, knowing which doors were left unlocked and which dogs would stay silent at the scent of a familiar face. The show, don't tell, of their premeditation was in the silence of the approach, the way they avoided the crunch of gravel and synchronized their movements with the distant, rhythmic creaking of the forest. The first scene of the slaughter was the home of Chris Rhoden Sr. and his cousin Gary. Inside, the atmosphere was one of heavy, unsuspecting sleep, the air smelling of old tobacco and the mechanical grease of Chris's trade. The killers entered like a shadow, their suppressed .40 caliber and .22 caliber pistols raised with a clinical, unblinking focus. There was no confrontation, no dramatic dialogue. Chris Sr. was executed in his bed, the suppressed rounds making a sound no louder than a heavy book hitting a carpet, a soft, rhythmic thud-thud that signaled the end of the Rhoden patriarch. Gary Rhoden, caught in the crossfire of a nightmare he never saw coming, was eliminated with the same terrifying precision. The killers stood over the bodies for a heartbeat, the only sound the cooling of the gun barrels and the heavy, metallic scent of blood beginning to pool on the linoleum. They didn't linger. They moved with the rhythmic pace of a checklist, exiting the trailer and vanishing back into the Appalachian mist, leaving behind a silence that was now permanent. The violence then migrated up the road to the home of Clarence, Frankie, Rhoden, and Hannah, Hazel Gilly. This was the most intimate of the betrayals. Frankie had been a friend, a neighbor, a peer. The killers entered the trailer where the young couple lay sleeping, their 6-month-old son nestled between them in the bed. The show, don't tell, of the Wagners' depravity was in the geometry of the shooting. They aimed around the infant, their focus so narrow and so cold that they could fire multiple rounds into the heads of the parents while the child remained untouched. Frankie and Hannah were executed in their sleep, their lives extinguished in a flurry of muffled reports. When the killers left, the trailer was a tomb, save for the rhythmic, soft breathing of the infant, whose pajamas were now splattered with the warmth of his parents' blood. The killers didn't look back at the child. To them, he was a variable that had been accounted for, a living witness who lacked the words to tell the truth. The third location, the trailer shared by Dana Rhoden, her daughter Hannah, and her son Chris Jr., was the strategic center of the massacre. This was where the motive resided. The killers moved through this home with a specific, vengeful energy. Dana, the fierce protector, was killed in her bed, her life taken with the same repetitive, clinical headshots that had become the signature of the night. Chris Jr., only 16, was eliminated in his room, his youth providing no shield against the Wagners' scorched earth policy. But the primary target was Hannah Rhoden. She was the woman who had dared to say no to the Wagners, the mother who wanted a life independent of their control. She lay in her bed with her 4-day-old infant, the air still smelling of the hospital and new life. The killer, likely Jake Wagner, the man who once claimed to love her, stood at the foot of the bed. The show, Don't Tell, of his psychology was in the absolute absence of hesitation. He fired into the woman who had mothered his child, ensuring that she would never speak again, never fight for custody again. The 4-day-old baby was spared, left to nurse on a body that was rapidly losing its warmth, a living miracle in a house saturated with the scent of gunpowder and iron. The final stop was the isolated trailer of Kenneth Roden, miles away from the others. The night was beginning to fray at the edges, the first hints of a jaundiced gray light appearing in the east, but the killers were not finished. Kenneth was a solitary punctuation mark. They entered his home and executed him with the same rhythmic, muffled efficiency. With his death, the map of the Roden family had been surgically altered. 8 people were dead across 4 locations, and the Wagners had not left a single footprint, a single casing, or a single drop of their own blood. They moved back to their vehicle, the night vision goggles finally coming off as the world began to regain its natural colors. They drove away from Union Hill Road, the silence of the hollows returning, but it was a different kind of silence now, a hollow, haunted quiet that would eventually be broken by the screams of the discovery. The sensory details of the return to the Wagner farm were a study in the banality of evil. They didn't celebrate, they cleaned. They burned their clothes in a large drum, the smell of melting polyester and cotton mingling with the scent of the morning dew. They dismantled the customized parts of their weapons and disposed of them in the murky depths of a farm pond. They spent the morning acting as if they were just another rural family starting their day, while the blood of their neighbors was still wet on their memories. The show, Don't Tell, of their coordination was in the absolute lack of panic. They had practiced this. They had rehearsed the movements, the entries, and the exits. They believed they had committed the perfect crime because they had utilized the very geography and social trust of Pike County to mask their movements. They were the neighbors who knew which window was broken and which floorboard creaked, and they used that intimacy to facilitate a massacre. The psychological landscape of the incident phase reveals a family that had completely detached itself from the concept of shared humanity. To the Wagners, the Rodens were no longer people, they were obstacles and a tactical objective. This dehumanization allowed them to move from one trailer to the next, killing mothers, fathers, and teenagers with the same emotional weight one might bring to a household chore. The show, Don't Tell, of their collective delusion was in their belief that they were saving Sophia by murdering everyone who loved her. They viewed the blood on their hands as a necessary baptism for their family's future control. This narcissistic, insular logic was the engine that drove the kill truck through the Appalachian night, a father and his sons moving in a synchronized dance of death while the mother waited at home, the architect of the narrative they were fulfilling. As the fog began to lift over Union Hill Road on the morning of April 22nd, the physical record of the incident was a nightmare of stillness. In the first trailer, the television might have still been flickering, a ghostly light dancing over the bodies of Chris Sr. and Gary. In the second, the whimpering of a 6-month-old was the only sound in a room where 2 young lives had been cut short. In the third, the 4-day-old infant was the silent center of a 3-room slaughter. The incident was not just a series of murders, it was a total environmental shock. The smell of the woods, usually fresh and pine-heavy, was now tainted by the metallic, cloying odor of a family's erasure. The trailers, which had been sanctuaries of a hardscrabble Appalachian life, were now forensic puzzles, their thin walls holding the secrets of a night that Pike County would never be able to forget. The pacing of the incident was a frantic, high-velocity blur for the victims, but for the killers, it was a slow, deliberate exercise in control. They didn't rush. They took their time to ensure that each shot was fatal, each person accounted for. This rhythmic, unhurried violence is the most terrifying aspect of the Pike County massacre. It suggests a level of comfort with death that is almost impossible to comprehend. They moved through the Rodens' lives with a terrifying, ghost-like invisibility, proving that the most dangerous predator is the one who has shared your table. The show, Don't tell of their success was the fact that for over 2 years, the police would have no idea how they did it. They had utilized the silence of the Hollows as their primary accomplice, and the silence had held. The aftermath of the incident began with the first light of dawn, a cold, jaundiced sun that revealed the carnage, but offered no explanation. The Wagners were back in their own beds, or beginning their morning chores. The black hair dye washed from their skin, but the darkness of the night still etched into their souls. They believed they had won. They believed the rodent problem had been solved with the pull of a few triggers. They didn't realize that the blood they had spilled was a trail that would eventually lead the world to their doorstep. The incident was over. The 8 souls of Union Hill Road were gone, and the largest investigation in Ohio history was about to be birthed from the silence of the trailers. The babies were still crying, the dogs were finally barking, and the mist was retreating, leaving behind a map of slaughter that would haunt the Appalachian Hills forever. In the final accounting of that night, the incident stands as a testament to the destructive power of a family turned inward. The Wagners didn't just kill the rodents, they killed the very idea of community in Pike County. They proved that a neighbor's smile could be a mask for a predator's gaze, and that a friendly wave could be a reconnaissance for a murder. The sensory memories of that night, the smell of the hair dye, the green glow of the night vision, the muffled thud of the suppressed shots, and the chilling silence of the spared infants are the permanent markers of the Pike County massacre. It was a night when the darkness of the Hollows came inside, and when a family of neighbors turned into a squad of executioners, leaving a legacy of blood that no amount of justice could ever truly wash away. The show, Don't Tell, of the final moments of the incident is the sight of the Wagner truck driving away, its headlights off, disappearing into the gray pre-dawn light. It carried a family that had just committed the unthinkable, moving with a chilling, synchronized calm toward a future they thought they had secured. Behind them, Union Hill Road was a graveyard in slow motion. The atmosphere was one of absolute, frozen trauma. The woods were quiet, the wind had died down, and the only thing moving was the smoke from a distant chimney and the rising, agonizing realization that the rodents were no longer there. The incident was the fracture point, the moment the world broke for Pike County, and the beginning of a saga that would redefine the meaning of the word betrayal. As we conclude this chapter of the nightmare, we must hold on to the image of the 4-day-old infant in the bed with Hannah Roden. That child is the living record of the night the Wagners tried to erase the world. The incident was a surgical strike against a bloodline, a calculated attempt to rewrite a family's history in lead and iron. But the killers forgot one thing: the land remembers, and the silence of the Hollows eventually speaks. The investigation was about to start, and the Wagners' perfect night was about to be picked apart by 1,000 hands, each one searching for the truth that was hidden in the blood, the mist, and the dark heart of Union Hill Road. The sheer volume of the premeditation, the shoes, the trucks, the hair dye, the night vision, reveals a family that had replaced their moral compass with a tactical manual. They didn't just decide to kill, they decided to become a machine. This transition from a family to a lethal unit is the psychological core of the incident. It shows a level of collective indoctrination that is more terrifying than any lone madman. They were the Wagners, and they were the law of the night. But as the sun finally cleared the treeline, the light was coming for them, a slow, unrelenting force that would eventually strip away their masks and show the world the monsters that had been hiding in the Hollows all along. The incident was the beginning of their end, a night of blood that would eventually lead to a lifetime of concrete and steel. The atmospheric pressure of the morning after was a physical weight on Pike County. The news spread like a wildfire through the narrow valleys. The rodents are gone. The show, Don't Tell, of the community shock was in the immediate locking of doors and the loading of weapons. People who had lived there for 70 years suddenly felt like strangers in their own homes. The incident had shattered the fundamental social contract of the hills. If the rodents could be killed in their beds, no one was safe. This environment of total, unadulterated fear was the final product of the Wagners' night of work. They had achieved their goal of control, but in doing so, they had unleashed a darkness that would consume them as well. The story of the incident is a tragedy of two families and a single night, a narrative of blood that is still being written in the echoes of the Appalachian Hills. The morning of April 22, 2016, dawned with a deceptively gentle light as the gray veil of the Appalachian mist retreated slowly from the hollows of Pike County, clinging to the jagged treelines and the rusted roofs of the trailers along Union Hill Road. The world should have been waking to the familiar, gritty rhythms of rural Ohio. The distant rumble of a diesel engine, the rhythmic clucking of chickens, and the first aromatic wafts of wood smoke and coffee. Bobby Jo Manley, the sister of Christopher Rhoden Sr., walked toward the first trailer at 4077 Union Hill Road with the mechanical ease of a woman performing a daily ritual. She was there to feed the dogs and start the morning chores, her boots crunching softly on the gravel, her breath blooming in the crisp, humid air. But as she approached the door, the atmosphere of the clearing felt unnaturally heavy, a stagnant, pressurized silence that seemed to vibrate with an unspoken warning. The dogs, usually a frantic chorus of barking and tail wagging, were strangely subdued, pacing the perimeter of their enclosures with their tails tucked low, their eyes reflecting a primal, confused terror that Bobby Jo didn't yet understand. The transition from the mundane to the macabre occurred the moment she stepped across the threshold of Chris Sr.'s home. The door, which should have been locked against the night, gave way with a soft, ominous click. Inside, the air didn't just smell of stale tobacco or the grease of her brother's trade. It was saturated with a thick, cloying, and metallic sweetness that hit her nostrils like a physical blow. It was the scent of biological surrender, the unmistakable aroma of a massive amount of blood beginning to cool and congeal in the stagnant air of a closed room. Bobby Jo's heart began a frantic, irregular thumping against her ribs as she moved into the dim light of the living room. She found Chris Sr. and his cousin Gary in the back bedroom, and the sight was an anatomical nightmare that defied the orderly laws of her world. The show, don't tell, of the violence was etched into the very fabric of the room. The white sheets were turned a deep, obsidian crimson, the saturation so heavy that the liquid had begun to pool on the linoleum floor, reflecting the jaundiced light of a television that was still flickering with some forgotten morning broadcast. The discovery was not a singular event, but a cascading trauma that moved down the road like a dark contagion. Bobby Jo, her mind shattered and her body operating on a surge of pure, raw adrenaline, fled the first trailer and sought help from her brother James. Together, they raced to the next home, the trailer of Frankie Rhoden and Hannah Gilley. Here, the horror was compounded by the presence of the living among the dead. As they burst into the bedroom, the metallic scent was even sharper, more aggressive. Frankie and Hannah lay in their bed, their features erased by the same clinical, execution-style headshots that had silenced Chris Sr., but between them, tucked under the blood-soaked covers, was their 6-month-old son. The child was alive, his pajamas stained with a warmth that was rapidly turning cold, his wide, uncomprehending eyes staring into the faces of his frantic relatives. The show, don't tell, of the killer's coldness was found in that child's survival, the calculated choice to spare the infant while turning his parents into forensic puzzles. By the time the third location was reached, the home of Dana Rhoden, the sheer scale of the atrocity was beginning to paralyze the community's ability to process it. Inside, the carnage was a repetitive, rhythmic statement of absolute erasure. Dana, the fierce matriarch, was found in her bed, her life taken with a ferocity that suggested a deep, personal animosity. In the next room lay Hannah Rhoden, the young mother whose struggle for independence had been the hidden engine of the night's violence. The sensory details of this room were the most heartbreaking of all. Hannah lay dead, but her 4-day-old infant daughter was still cradled against her side, the child's tiny, rhythmic breathing a defiant contrast to the absolute silence of the 3 bodies in the house. The infant was covered in her mother's blood, a living testament to a night where the boundaries between life and death were blurred by a family of executioners who had moved through these homes with a terrifying, ghost-like invisibility. The first responders who flooded Pike County on that Friday morning were met with a scene that resembled a war zone more than a criminal investigation. The show, don't tell, of the investigative shock was in the number of police cruisers, black forensic vans, and state-issued helicopters that suddenly dominated the rural skyline. Union Hill Road, once a quiet, forgotten artery of the Appalachian foothills, was now crisscrossed with miles of yellow crime scene tape, a bright, garish ribbon that officially transformed a family's clearing into a graveyard. Sheriff Charles Reeder and state agents from the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI, moved through the tall grass and the mud with a grim, focused urgency. They were looking for the how in a landscape that offered only the what. The discovery was a logistical nightmare for separate crime scenes, 8 victims, and an absolute absence of the usual markers of an intruder. There were no jimmied windows, no shattered door frames, and most tellingly, no shell casings littering the floors. The killers had used brass catchers or meticulously retrieved their evidence, a tell of a professional, paramilitary level of premeditation. The psychological weight of the discovery was a physical presence that could be felt in every grocery store and on every porch in the county. As news of the massacre spread, Pike County became a fortress of paranoia. The residents, who had spent decades in a state of unbothered, rural peace, suddenly saw their neighbors as potential predators. The show, don't tell, of the community's fear was the sound of deadbolts clicking shut and the sight of men sitting on their porches with shotguns across their laps, watching the tree lean for a shadow that shouldn't be there. The realization that the killers knew the rodents' habits, that they knew which doors were unlocked, which dogs wouldn't bark, and where everyone was sleeping, created a sense of violation that was deeper than the loss of life. It suggested that the monster wasn't a stranger from the city, but a creature of the hollows themselves. The fourth and final discovery occurred later that afternoon at the secluded home of Kenneth Roden. His death was the final punctuation mark in a night of coordinated butchery. Found miles away from the others, his solitary end confirmed the surgical nature of the massacre. The killers hadn't just struck a house, they had attempted to decapitate an entire bloodline. The atmosphere at Kenneth's home was one of stagnant, lonely tragedy. The sun was high in the sky now, the light revealing the dust motes dancing in the air of his silent trailer, a cruel contrast to the blood that stained his bed. The investigators who walked into this fourth scene were exhausted, their minds saturated with the gore of the previous 7 victims, and the sight of Kenneth was the moment the true, global magnitude of the Pike County massacre finally sank in. The forensic clues found in those first 48 hours were a mixture of what was present and what was hauntingly absent. The medical examiners noted the execution style, delivery of the wounds. Almost all victims had been shot multiple times in the head at point-blank range while they slept. This was the signature of a predator who wanted to ensure there was no resistance, no witness, and no chance for the invisibles to ever speak again. The lack of DNA from the killers, the lack of footprints in the damp earth, and the lack of fingerprints on the door handles suggested a family of murderers who had practiced their movements until they were as fluid as the mist in the valleys. The show, don't tell, of their preparation was in the silence of the Rodens' own security systems, the dogs that didn't bark because they knew the people walking up the drive. This detail was the first real clue that the killers were not just from the county, but from the inner circle of the Roden family's life. The sensory transition of Pike County during the discovery phase was a trauma of colors and sounds. The vibrant green of the Spring Hills was now punctuated by the strobe-like flashes of police lights. The quiet of the woods was replaced by the constant, low-frequency hum of generators and the shouting of state agents over the noise of the wind. The smell of the earth was now inseparable from the scent of the bleach and chemicals used to process the scenes. The discovery had turned a private family tragedy into a national obsession, a morality play set in the rugged heart of America. The images broadcast to the world, the rusted trailers, the overgrown yards, the line of black hearses, created a portrait of a region in crisis, a place where the darkness of the hills had finally come inside to stay. The psychological profile of the discovery revealed a family, the Rodens, that had lived a life of fierce, isolated loyalty. As the investigators looked into their backgrounds, Finding the marijuana grow-ops and the cockfighting rings, they saw a group of people who had been trying to survive in an environment that offered very little formal support. These details were initially seen by the media as motives, leading to a flurry of false theories about cartels and gang hits. But to the local investigators, these were just the textures of a hardscrabble Appalachian life. The real clue was the overkill in the bedroom of Hannah Roden. Why kill a teenage girl and her entire family over a child? This was the question that hung in the air, heavier than the fog. The discovery was showing that the violence was not about drugs or money. It was about possession. It was a war over a child, fought with the weapons of a paramilitary unit. The babies who survived, the 4-day-old girl and the S-month-old boy, were the most haunting clues of all. Their presence in the middle of the carnage was a strategic statement. The killers didn't leave them alive out of a sudden surge of mercy. They left them because those children were the prizes of the war. To leave a baby in a bed with a dead mother is a level of psychological cruelty that is difficult to fathom, yet it was a fundamental part of the Wagner's plan. The infants were the living record of the night the world broke for Pike County. The sight of the child welfare officers carrying the babies out of the trailers, wrapped in forensic blankets, was the final, devastating image of the discovery phase. The family was gone. The future was in the hands of the state, and the Hills were watching it all with their ancient, unblinking eyes. The investigation that grew out of the discovery was the largest in Ohio history, a multi-year marathon of evidence collection and psychological digging. The show, Don't Tell, of the scale was in the makeshift command center established in the county, where hundreds of agents worked in shifts, their faces pale under the flickering fluorescent lights, their desks covered in thousands of photographs of the Union Hill Road scenes. They were looking for the ghost who had left no shell casings, the phantom who had dyed their hair black to blend into the night, and the family that had sat around a table and decided that 8 people had to die. The discovery had provided the bodies, but it would take years for the soil and the water of Pike County to give up the weapons and the truth. The atmospheric pressure on the Manley and Roden families during those first weeks was suffocating. Bobby, Joe, and James, the ones who had seen the carnage first, were subjected to endless rounds of questioning, their grief treated as a potential cover for guilt. They lived in a world where the law was both their protector and their primary suspect. The show, Don't Tell, of their trauma was in the way they retreated from the public eye, their homes becoming fortresses of their own as they waited for an answer that seemed to be hiding in the very woods they called home. The discovery had not brought closure. It had only opened a wound that was now infected with suspicion and fear. As the sun set on that first weekend of the investigation, the trailers on Union Hill Road stood empty and silent, their windows dark, their interiors hollowed out by the forensic teams. The blood had been sampled, the bodies removed, and the secrets of the night recorded in black and white. The discovery was complete, but the haunting of Pike County was just beginning. The silence that returned to the hollows was not the peace of the past, but the heavy, expectant silence of a community waiting for the next blow. The monsters were still out there, sitting in their own homes, perhaps even attending the funerals of the people they had murdered. The light had revealed the slaughter, but the truth was still buried deep in the Appalachian dark, waiting for the slow, grinding machinery of justice to find its way through the mist. The final image of the discovery phase is the site of the Union Hill Road graveyard, the 8 markers of a family erased in a single night. The show, Don't Tell, of the tragedy is the fact that the most frequent visitors to the site were the very people who had committed the crime, the Wagners who used their status as grieving friends to keep an eye on the investigation. This level of narcissism and deception is the psychological core of the Pike County massacre. The discovery was not just about finding the dead. It was about realizing that the living were far more dangerous. The morning light of April 22nd had shown the world the bodies, but it would take a different kind of light, the light of a courtroom and a confession, to show them the monsters. The babies were safe for now, the trailers were boarded up, and the hills of Ohio held their breath, a rhythmic, haunting presence that would never let the story of the Roden family fade. The sensory details of the discovery, the smell of the blood, the sight of the infants, the sound of the sirens, remained as a permanent scar on the memory of the first responders. They would never look at a trailer in the woods the same way again. They would never trust the silence of a rural night. The discovery phase of the Pike County Massacre was a study in the absolute fragility of life and the absolute power of a family's obsession. It was the moment the American dream of a quiet, independent life in the hills was proven to be a target, and the moment a whole county realized that the most dangerous place on earth is your own bed, in your own home, with your own neighbor watching from the shadows. The investigation into the Pike County Massacre was not a sprint through the well-lit corridors of a modern forensic laboratory, but a grueling, multi-year marathon through the thickest, most deceptive shadows of the Appalachian Hollows. From the moment the first yellow tape was stretched across Union Hill Road, the scale of the task was staggering, a logistical behemoth that would eventually become the largest and most expensive criminal probe in the history of Ohio. Attorney General Mike DeWine and Sheriff Charles Reeder stood at the center of a storm that refused to dissipate, facing a crime scene that spanned 4 separate properties and yielded 8 bodies, but almost zero traditional physical evidence. The killers had not been sloppy. They had moved with a chilling, ghost-like invisibility that suggested a deep familiarity with both the victims and the geography of the hills. The initial days were a blur of high-velocity activity. Hundreds of state agents from the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI, descended upon the county, their black windbreakers a jarring contrast to the vibrant spring green of the valley. They scoured the trailers, dismantled the floorboards, and sieved the soil, but the silence of the Rodens' homes was matched only by the silence of the evidence. The investigation's first major NGO cut, the first of many dead ends, was the seductive but ultimately hollow theory of a drug cartel hit. Because the Rodens were involved in large-scale marijuana grow-ops and professional cockfighting, the investigators initially fell into the trap of looking for a shadow from the South. They spent months chasing the idea of a professional Mexican cartel, theorizing that the surgical nature of the execution-style headshots was the signature of an international criminal organization. They followed leads that led to empty warehouses and interviewed associates in the underground world of rural Ohio, but the pieces never quite fit. A cartel hit would have been a message, loud, public, and messy. The Union Hill Road killings were different. They were intimate, quiet, and meticulously focused on a single bloodline. The show, Don't Tell, of this investigative failure was found in the thousands of man-hours spent in the woods, hacking through briars to find marijuana plants that had nothing to do with the blood on the mattresses. The agents realized that while the Rodens had secrets, those secrets weren't the ones that had killed them. The violence was too personal, too rhythmic, and too specific to a local motive. As the cartel theory withered under the cold light of forensic reality, the investigators turned their focus back to the social fabric of Pike County. They began to pull at the threads of the Rodens' personal lives, and that was when a name began to emerge from the background noise: the Wagners. George Billy Wagner III, his wife Angela, and their sons George IV and Jake were once the Rodens' closest allies. They were the neighbors who shared meals, traded mechanical parts, and whose lives were intertwined through the shared parenthood of Sophia, the daughter of Jake Wagner and the murdered Hannah Roden. But the Wagners were masters of the long game. In the early months of the investigation, they didn't flee, they integrated. They attended the funerals, their faces masks of grieving friendship, their voices joining the chorus of who could have done this. The show, Don't Tell, of their deception was in the way Jake Wagner would hold his daughter, Sophia, while the search for her mother's killer raged just a few miles away. He played the part of the grieving father with a chilling, practiced ease, even as he and his family were already planning their next move. The investigation then entered a phase of agonizing, microscopic detail. The BCI agents established a makeshift command center in the county, a space that smelled of stale coffee and the ozone of high-powered computers. They processed over 1,100 tips, conducted hundreds of interviews, and analyzed thousands of hours of surveillance footage from local gas stations and backroad security cameras. They were looking for a vehicle, specifically, a truck that shouldn't have been on the roads in the pre-dawn hours of April 22nd. The breakthrough that wasn't yet a breakthrough came when they identified a silver Ford truck that had been sold by the Wagners shortly after the murders. The recovery of this vehicle became a cornerstone of the forensic effort. The show, don't tell, of the investigators' obsession was in the way they dismantled that truck bolt by bolt. They stripped the upholstery, removed the dashboard, and utilized advanced luminol and chemical tests to search for a single microscopic drop of rodent blood or a stray grain of gunpowder that had been missed by the Wagners' own cleaning. It was a search for a ghost in a machine, a testament to the fact that the law was no longer just looking for people, it was looking for molecules. In 2017, the investigation hit another massive NGO cut when the entire Wagner family suddenly uprooted their lives and moved to Alaska. They sold their farm, packed their belongings into a massive trailer, and drove thousands of miles away, settling in a remote area that felt like a mirror of the Appalachian isolation they had left behind. To the public, it looked like an escape. To the investigators, it was a tactical challenge. The pressure on the BCI was immense. They were accused of letting them get away, but behind the scenes, the investigation had moved into the realm of high-stakes electronic warfare. They utilized a blue light strategy, keeping the Wagners under constant, invisible surveillance even in the Alaskan wilderness. They secretly placed wiretaps inside the Wagners' vehicles, listening to hundreds of hours of mundane family conversations, waiting for a single slip, a single mention of Union Hill Road, or a single moment of shared guilt. The show, don't tell, of this phase was the silence of the recordings. The Wagners were so disciplined, so synchronized in their narrative, that they rarely spoke of the Rodens at all. It was as if they had collectively deleted the memory of their neighbors from their family history. The investigation's turning point, the moment that NGO cut finally gave way to a path forward, occurred when the team returned to the geography of the Wagners' old life in Ohio. They focused on a farm the family had owned, specifically a murky, stagnant pond nestled in the back of the property. Based on a tip and a forensic hunch, they brought in a team of divers. The atmosphere at the pond was one of stagnant, cold anticipation. The divers moved through the thick, black mud at the bottom, their hands groping through the silt and the decayed leaves. The breakthrough was a physical, metallic reality. They found the remains of a customized silencer and parts of a firearm that had been dismantled and tossed into the depths. This was the smoking gun that didn't smoke. It was the physical proof of the paramilitary preparation that had defined the massacre. The show, don't tell, was the sight of the rusted, mud-caked metal being pulled from the water, a silent witness that the Wagners thought would never be found. This discovery provided the ballistic link that the investigation had been missing for 2 years. The psychological warfare between the investigators and the Wagners intensified. The police began a series of strategic leaks, letting the family know that the net was tightening, that the pond had given up its secrets, and that the truck was being analyzed atom by atom. They began to target the weakest links in the family unit, the mother, Angela, and the younger son, Jake. They utilized the pressure of the impending death penalty as a lever, playing on the very familial loyalty that the Wagners had used to commit the crime. The investigation was no longer about finding new clues. It was about cracking the armor of a family that functioned as a singular, lethal organism. The show, don't tell, of the Wagners' collapse was in the subtle changes in their behavior. The way Angela's voice trembled during her final interviews, the way Jake's eyes darted toward his father during the questioning, and the eventual, crushing weight of the evidence that made their perfect crime look like an amateur's mistake. One of the most frustrating NGO cut for the agents was the lack of cooperation from the surrounding community. In the hollows of Pike County, snitching was a sin worse than murder for some. People who had heard the trucks in the night or who had noticed the Wagners' suspicious behavior in the days following the massacre kept their mouths shut, bound by a culture of rural silence and a deep-seated distrust of outside authority. The investigators had to spend months building trust with people who viewed them as an invading force. They had to sit on porches, drink lukewarm coffee, and wait for the unspoken truths to be whispered. This social investigation was just as grueling as the forensic one. The show, don't tell, of this cultural barrier was the way doors would close and curtains would twitch when the BCI vehicles drove down Union Hill Road. The investigation wasn't just fighting a killer, it was fighting a way of life that protected its own, even when its own were monsters. The logistical scale of the investigation eventually revealed a narrative of obsessive reconnaissance. The agents found that the Wagners had not just planned the murder, they had lived it in their minds for months. They had purchased specific calibers of ammunition from different stores to avoid a paper trail. They had practiced their shots in the woods, using the sound of the wind to mask the noise. They had even purchased specific shoes that were one size too large or too small to throw off any potential footprinting. The investigation was revealing a level of premeditation that bordered on the psychotic. The show, Don't Tell, was in the discovery of a kill kit hidden in a wall of their home, extra magazines, black clothing, and the night vision goggles that had turned the rodent sanctuary into a battlefield. Every new piece of evidence was a testament to the Wagners' belief that they were smarter than the law, and every piece of evidence was proving them wrong. As 2018 arrived, the investigation had become a suffocating 24-hour reality for the Wagner family. They were back in Ohio, under the constant watch of agents who now knew the names of their dogs and the rhythms of their morning chores. The NGO cut were gone, replaced by a singular, unrelenting focus on the November day when the indictments would finally be handed down. The investigation had moved from the blood-stained trailers of Union Hill Road to the sterile, high-tech war rooms of the BCI, but the heart of the case remained the same: a dispute over a child, a family's obsession, and the 8 souls who had paid the price. The show, Don't Tell, of the investigation's conclusion was the sight of the 4 Wagners being led into the courthouse in handcuffs, a family unit that had killed together and would now face the consequences together. The largest investigation in Ohio history had succeeded not through a single moment of luck, but through the relentless, grinding application of science and psychology against the silence of the hills. The sensory details of the investigation's final stages remain etched in the minds of the lead agents: the smell of the mud from the pond, the cold weight of the dismantled silencer, the flickering lights of the Alaskan wiretap monitors, and the overwhelming, metallic scent of the forensic lab where the truck was finally proven to be a murder weapon. It was a journey into the dark heart of a family that had traded its humanity for a warped sense of possession. The investigation had stripped away the Wagners' mimicry of normalcy, showing the world the monsters that had been hiding in plain sight. As the files were finally prepared for trial, the silence of Pike County was replaced by the noise of the law, the sound of gavels, the rustle of legal papers, and the voices of the investigators who had refused to let the rodents be forgotten. The investigation was over, but the reckoning was just beginning, a final confrontation between the laws of the land and the law of the hollows. In the end, the investigation into the Pike County massacre was a study in the persistence of truth. It showed that no matter how deep you bury a weapon, no matter how many miles you drive away, and no matter how many layers of family loyalty you use to hide your tracks, the evidence remains. The show, Don't Tell, of the BCI's victory was in the meticulous organization of the evidence, the thousands of photos, the DNA samples, and the ballistics reports that formed a physical wall of guilt that the Wagners could not climb. The investigation had turned the silent trailers of Union Hill Road into a megaphone for justice, proving that in the Appalachian Hills of Ohio, the dead eventually find a way to speak. The NGO cut were merely the tests of the investigators' resolve, and the breakthrough was the reward for a decade of not looking away. The stage was now set for the final act, the trial where the Wagners would have to face the world and answer for the night they turned their neighbors into ghosts. The atmospheric weight of the investigation phase was a permanent feature of the life of Pike County for 2.5 years. It was a time of stagnant dread, a period where the community lived in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The investigation had changed the county's DNA, turning a place of unbothered privacy into a site of global scrutiny. The show, Don't Tell, of this social trauma was in the way people spoke, quietly with one eye on the road and one eye on the woods. The investigation had revealed a darkness that no one wanted to admit existed, but it had also shown the resilience of those who sought the truth. As the Wagners sat in their cells, the hills of Ohio seemed to let out a long, slow breath, the mist finally clearing from the hollows to reveal a world that was ready for the light. The final word on the investigation was one of absolute, clinical exhaustion. The agents had given years of their lives to the Roden family, walking through their blood and breathing their air until the 8 victims felt like their own kin. The show, Don't Tell, was the sight of Sheriff Reeder and Mike DeWine standing before the cameras on the day of the arrests, their faces etched with the deep lines of a marathon they had finally finished. They didn't need to say, "We caught them." The weight of the files on the table and the shackles on the Wagner's wrists said it for them. The investigation was a monument to the fact that justice in America is not a lightning strike, but a steady, unrelenting rain that eventually washes away the mud to find the stone beneath. The Rodens were gone, but their story was now a permanent part of the law, a narrative of blood that had finally found its ending in the light. The breakthrough that finally dismantled the Wagner family's wall of silence was not a single, explosive moment of cinematic revelation, but a slow, agonizing friction of science and persistence against a narrative of absolute deception. For 2 years, the investigation into the Pike County massacre had felt like a journey through a sunless forest, with every promising lead dissolving into the Appalachian mist. But in early 2017, the atmosphere in the Bureau of Criminal Investigations command center shifted from a state of reactive grief to one of predatory focus. The investigators had stopped looking for a cartel and started looking at the geography of a betrayal. The first fracture in the Wagner's perfect crime appeared not in a bloodstain, but in the metadata of a transaction. The BCI agents, their eyes bloodshot from staring at thousands of pages of financial records and surveillance logs, identified a silver 2014 Ford truck that the Wagners had sold shortly after the murders. This vehicle, which had been traded to a dealership and then sold to an unsuspecting owner, was tracked down like a piece of living history. When the BCI finally recovered the truck, they didn't just search it. They performed a forensic autopsy. In a sterile, high-intensity lab, agents dismantled the vehicle bolt by bolt, stripping the upholstery and peeling back the carpet until the skeletal frame of the truck was exposed. It was here, in the hidden recesses of the cabin, that they found the show, Don't Tell, of the Wagner's paramilitary preparation. They discovered that the floorboards had been modified with custom-built compartments designed to conceal heavy equipment and firearms. Even more devastating was the microscopic residue, faint traces of lead, and the chemical ghost of gunpowder that matched the calibers used on Union Hill Road. This truck was no longer a vehicle, it was a mobile armory, a physical record of the months the Wagners had spent preparing for the slaughter. As this evidence was being meticulously catalogued, the investigation's psychological pressure was mounting. The Wagners' sudden and dramatic move to Alaska in the summer of 2017, which they presented as a search for a new life, was viewed by the law as a tactical retreat. The BCI responded with a level of electronic surveillance that was unprecedented in Ohio's history. They utilized blue light technology to monitor the family's communications across thousands of miles, listening to the mundane rhythms of their lives in the Alaskan wilderness. For months, the agents sat in darkened rooms in Ohio, headphones pressed to their ears, listening to the Wagners talk about the weather, their dogs, and their finances. The discipline of the family was terrifying. They rarely spoke of the Rodens, but the absolute absence of the topic became a clue in itself, a void in the social fabric that suggested a shared, unspoken secret. The breakthrough reached its tipping point when the investigation returned to the Flying W farm, the Wagners' former property in Ohio. Based on a forensic hunch and a specific tip, a team of BCI divers was deployed to a murky, stagnant pond nestled in a ravine at the back of the lot. The water was a freezing, obsidian soup, its bottom layered with decades of decayed leaves and thick, silty mud. The divers moved through the dark by touch, their hands groping through the freezing sludge until one of them felt the cold, unmistakable texture of metal. It was a weighted bucket, and inside were the dismantled components of the murder weapons, including the customized, homemade silencers that had turned the Rodens' homes into silent graveyards. This was the physical breakthrough that connected the Wagners to the ballistic signature of the massacre. The science was now undeniable. The rifling on the recovered barrels matched the fragments pulled from the victims' skulls. But the investigators needed more than just the guns. They needed the how and the why. They returned to the Wagners' new residence in Ohio, where the family had relocated after their failed Alaskan odyssey. In a series of high-stakes searches, agents discovered a kill kit hidden behind a false wall in a barn, a collection of night vision goggles, black tactical clothing, and the specific ammunition used in the killings. They also found receipts for black hair dye purchased in the days leading up to the massacre, confirming the theory that the killers had darkened their features to vanish into the night. The final breakthrough was the realization that the Wagners' obsession with Sophia had left a trail of digital breadcrumbs. Investigators recovered a custody journal kept by Angela Wagner, a document that revealed a mind consumed by a narcissistic, possessive rage. Every detail of Hannah Roden's life had been recorded and scrutinized, her desire for independence viewed as a mortal threat to the Wagner family unit. The breakthrough was the culmination of thousands of these small, gritty details: a single hair found in a truck, a piece of metal in a pond, a wiretapped whisper, and the cold, unblinking data of a cell phone tower. By November 2018, the net was finally ready to be pulled tight. The atmosphere in the BCI war room was one of somber, exhausted triumph as the indictments were signed. The breakthrough had transformed the Wagners from grieving neighbors into the most hunted family in the state. The move to arrest them was a coordinated strike across several counties, a synchronized display of force that mirrored the very precision the Wagners had used on the night of the massacre. As the handcuffs clicked shut on Billy, Angela, George, and Jake, the silence of Pike County was finally replaced by the roar of justice. The breakthrough had proven that in the Appalachian Hills, the earth eventually gives up its secrets, and that the most perfect crime is always flawed by the humanity of the people who commit it. The investigators had looked into the abyss of the Wagners' obsession and had come back with the truth, a truth that was written in the molecules of the pond water and the hidden compartments of a silver truck. The Pike County massacre was no longer a mystery. It was a map of a family's descent into madness, and the breakthrough was the light that had finally found its way into the deepest part of the hollow. The sensory memories of this phase remain as a haunting legacy: the weight of the rusted silencer in a diver's hand, the jaundiced glow of the surveillance monitors, and the overwhelming, metallic scent of the forensic lab where the Wagners' secrets were finally stripped bare. The breakthrough was a testament to the fact that while a family can kill together, they can rarely survive the relentless, grinding weight of the law when it is fueled by the memory of 8 lost souls. The net was closed, the monsters were in cages, and the long, dark night of Pike County was finally coming to an end, replaced by the harsh, clarifying light of the courtroom where the Wagners would have to answer for every drop of blood they had spilled on Union Hill Road. The breakthrough was the end of the hunt, but it was also the beginning of the final reckoning for the souls of Union Hill Road, a narrative of blood that had finally found its path to the light. The courtroom in Waverly, Ohio, during the peak of the Wagner trials was not merely a hall of justice, but a pressurized chamber of collective grief and chilling realization, where the air felt thick with the stagnant weight of 5 years of unanswered questions and the cold, metallic scent of iron-bound fate. To enter that space was to witness the final, agonizing collision between a community's need for closure and a family's absolute descent into a shared, monochromatic madness. The benches were packed with the surviving remnants of the Roden and Manley families, people whose faces had become a permanent map of Appalachian sorrow, their eyes fixed with a haunting, rhythmic intensity on the heavy wooden doors through which the monsters of their own neighborhood would soon emerge. When the chains finally rattled, a sharp, staccato sound that cut through the low-frequency hum of the gallery, it signaled the arrival of the Wagners, no longer the untouchable kings of the hollows, but shadows of men and women shackled by the very obsession that had fueled their slaughter. The show, don't tell, of the justice phase was found in the absolute, frozen stillness of the room as Edward Jake Wagner, the man who had once claimed to love Hannah Roden, took his seat at the defense table. He looked different than the boy on the missing posters. His hair was cropped close, his gaze was a hollowed-out void, and he moved with a clinical, detached compliance of a man who had already bartered his soul for a life sentence. The breakthrough that had led to this moment was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering and psychological attrition, culminating on April 22, 2021, the fifth anniversary of the massacre, when Jake Wagner stood before Judge Randy Deering and uttered the word guilty 81 times, a rhythmic, soul-crushing admission that turned the perfect crime into a permanent record of depravity. His confession was the ultimate betrayal of the Wagner family unit, a tactical surrender designed to spare his mother and himself from the needle of the executioner. Yet in doing so, he laid bare the skeletal remains of the plot for the entire world to see. He described the kill truck with its hidden compartments, the black hair dye that had stained their sinks, and the way they had moved through the rodent trailers like ghosts in the dark, his voice steady and devoid of the tremors of regret. The horror in the courtroom was palpable, a physical vibration that made the wood of the benches feel cold to the touch as he detailed how he had shot the mother of his child while she slept with their infant. The justice being delivered was a cold, transactional thing, a life for 8 lives, but it was the only currency the Hills had left to spend. The trial of George Wagner IV, which followed in the autumn of 2022, was a different kind of confrontation, a battle of complicity and the hollow mentality that had bound the family together. George IV maintained a mask of defiant innocence, his defense arguing that he was merely a passenger in a machine he couldn't stop, but the prosecution dismantled this narrative with the precision of a surgeon. They showed the jury the kill kit recovered from the barn, the thousands of hours of surveillance footage that tracked their movements like a predator's map, and the testimonies of those who saw the family operating as a singular, lethal organism. The show, don't tell, of George's guilt was not in a smoking gun he fired, but in the months of preparation he facilitated, the scouting of the locations, the cleaning of the weapons, and the absolute, unyielding silence he maintained while his neighbors were buried. The jury, a collection of locals who understood the weight of a Pike County secret, deliberated for days while the atmosphere in the courthouse reached a boiling point of expectant dread. When the verdict of guilty was finally read for all 22 counts, including 8 counts of aggravated murder, the sound that erupted from the gallery was not one of joy, but a long, collective exhale of a breath that had been held for 6 years. The justice was a hammer blow, a declaration that the law of the Hollows was subservient to the law of the land. Angela Wagner, the matriarch and the perceived architect of the narrative, eventually followed suit, her testimony a window into a mind consumed by a warped, patriarchal sense of possession. She spoke of the protection of Sophia as if it were a holy war, her voice thin and sharp, a sensory reminder of the cold, controlling energy that had steered the Wagner truck toward Union Hill Road. The final sentencing hearings were a gallery of raw, unadulterated human pain. The victim impact statements were not just words, they were the sounds of a community's heart being torn open. Geneva Rigsby, the mother of Dana Roden, stood before the men who had erased her bloodline, her voice a low, vibrating growl of righteous fury as she told them that they had not just killed 8 people, but had killed the very meaning of the word neighbor. The show, don't tell, of the family's ruin was in the sight of the Wagners being led away to separate prisons, a family that had killed together and would now be forced to age and die in absolute, individual isolation. The sentences were a mountain of time, life without the possibility of parole, plus hundreds of years for the conspiracies and the burglaries, a mathematical attempt to quantify the unquantifiable loss of Union Hill Road. The justice was complete, but it felt hollow, a heavy, jaundiced victory in a world that still lacked the 8 people who should have been there. The courtroom, once the site of the greatest betrayal in Ohio's history, was finally quiet, the gavel's final strike echoing through the hallways like a period at the end of a sentence written in blood. The Wagners were no longer a family. They were a cautionary tale, a record of what happens when obsession is allowed to flourish in the dark, and the justice delivered was the light that finally, irrevocably, burned the shadows away. The hills of Pike County would never be the same, but as the black vans carried the killers toward their respective cages, the air on Union Hill Road seemed to lose some of its stagnant, pressurized weight, replaced by the first, fragile hints of a morning that didn't belong to the Wagners anymore. The justice was the end of the kitsch ban, the closing of the file, and the final, rhythmic affirmation that the dead of Union Hill Road would never be forgotten, their names etched into the very stones of the courthouse as a testament to the fact that even in the deepest hollows, the truth eventually finds its way home. To look at the faces of the investigators as the last Wagner was let out was to see the show, don't tell, of absolute exhaustion. A group of men and women who had looked into the abyss and had come back with enough light to secure the future for the children who had survived the night. The justice of the Pike County massacre was a slow, grinding process, a journey from the blood-stained mattresses to the sterile courtrooms, but in the end, it was an absolute, unyielding statement that the bond of community is stronger than the chain of obsession. The silence that now hangs over the empty lots on Union Hill Road is no longer a silence of fear, but a silence of remembrance, a space held for the 8 souls who were finally granted their day in the light of the law. The courtroom is empty, the transcripts are filed, and the Wagners are gone, leaving behind a legacy of blood and a lesson in the terrifying, destructive power of a family turned inward. The kitsch ban of their lives had ended in a cage, a fitting conclusion for those who had tried to turn their neighbors' homes into prisons. As the sun sets over Waverly, the shadows of the Appalachian foothills are long, but they no longer hold the same threat, for the monsters have been named, judged, and cast out, leaving the hills to the living and the memories of the rodents to the wind. The dust has finally settled over Union Hill Road, but the air in the hollows of Pike County remains thick with a heavy, unyielding absence that no amount of spring rain or summer sun can ever truly wash away. To walk those winding, gravel-dusted paths today is to navigate a landscape of ghosts, where the physical markers of the Roden family, the trailers, the demolition yards, the busy clearings, have been slowly reclaimed by the encroaching Appalachian wilderness. The weeds have grown tall around the spots where the foundations once sat, their green tendrils wrapping around rusted pieces of scrap metal like nature's attempt to bandage a jagged, open wound. The silence here is no longer the expectant, terrifying quiet of that April night in 2016. It is a hollow, permanent stillness, the sound of a community that has had its heart surgically removed and is still learning how to breathe through the void. The Pike County Massacre was not just a crime. It was a cultural extinction event for a family, leaving behind a legacy of blood, a mountain of legal transcripts, and a question that still vibrates through the trees. How does a neighbor's love turn into a neighbor's execution? The aftermath is most visible in the eyes of the survivors, specifically the 3 children who were found alive in the middle of the carnage. Those infants, now growing into childhood, carry a burden that is almost impossible to quantify. They are the living miracles of Pike County, but they are also the primary witnesses to a tragedy they lack the words to describe. Sophia, the girl whose very existence was the catalyst for the slaughter, lives in a world where her identity is forever tethered to a massacre. She is the daughter of a murdered mother and an incarcerated father, a child who must eventually reconcile the fact that one half of her bloodline systematically erased the other to keep her. The show, Don't Tell, of this trauma is in the way the community protects these children, a fierce, silent shielding that reflects the collective guilt of a county that didn't see the monsters in the van. The children are the only fruit left on a shattered tree, growing in the shade of a history they didn't choose, their laughter a fragile, defiant sound against the backdrop of the Union Hill Hollows. For the Manley and Roden families who remain, the aftermath is a marathon of empty chairs. The justice delivered in the Waverly courtroom was a necessary closing of a door, but it provided no warmth to the cold trailers and the lonely porches. Every holiday, every birthday, and every Sunday morning is a rhythmic reminder of the 8 souls who should have been there. They remember Chris Sr.'s grease-stained hands, Dana's fierce, protective laughter, Frankie's budding maturity, and Hannah's unyielding maternal fire. These aren't just names in a kitsch ban. They were the textures of a life lived with grit and loyalty. The family members move through the county like survivors of a natural disaster, their faces etched with the deep, permanent lines of a grief that has become a second skin. They have watched the trailers being hauled away and the land being cleared, but the geography of their hearts is still mapped to the night the world broke. The aftermath is the realization that while the killers are in cages, the victims are still gone, and the Pike County they once knew has been replaced by a map of trauma. The Wagners, meanwhile, exist in a different kind of aftermath, a sensory deprivation of their own making. The family that once did everything together, that shared meals and secrets and a lethal mission, is now scattered across the Ohio prison system in absolute, individual isolation. Billy, Angela, George, and Jake are now numbers in a database, their days defined by the gray geometry of concrete and the rhythmic, metallic clanging of cell doors. The irony of their control is absolute. They murdered 8 people to possess a single child, and in doing so, they lost the right to even speak her name. They wanted to own the future, but they ended up owning nothing but a 6x9 space and the crushing weight of their own choices. The show, Don't Tell, of their ruin is in the absolute silence of their lives. No more nights at the Flying W farm, no more family councils, no more Appalachian freedom. They are the architects of their own disappearance, a family unit that turned into a suicide pact for their souls. The broader community of Pike County has undergone a fundamental shift in its social DNA. The hollow mentality, which once emphasized privacy and minding one's own business, has been tainted by a lingering, low-frequency paranoia. The social contract of the hills, the belief that your neighbor is your safety net, was shattered on Union Hill Road. People still wave to each other at the grocery store, and they still pull each other's trucks out of the mud, but there is a new, sharp edge to the way they look at a stranger's vehicle or a neighbor's new habit. The massacre proved that the person who knows you best is the one who can hurt you most. This atmosphere of stagnant suspicion is the invisible fallout of the Wagners' crimes. The county is a place of locked doors now, a place where the darkness under the trees is no longer just a feature of the landscape, but a potential hiding place for a shadow you thought you knew. Psychologically, the aftermath of the Pike County massacre forced